Hello and welcome to our weekly Torah Talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Mishael Zion. Hello, Rabbi.
Hello.
He is the co-director, director of education of the Bronfman Youth Fellowships in Israel. And we will be talking about the second parsha of the Torah, Parashat Noach. God tells Noach, a righteous man in a wicked world, to build a wooden teiva, an ark, and get inside with a sample of all living creatures. The goal is to escape the great deluge that will wipe out all life from the face of the earth. Also in this parsha, the story of the Tower of Babylon. The descendants of Noah defy God by building a tower to reach for the heavens, and God confuses their languages to make them abandon their project. The first pasuk says, "Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya bedorotav, et haElohim italech Noach." These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. So, Rabbi, they get out of the ark after 40 days and they see a rainbow and they are saved, but then something strange happens. Noah begins to be a master of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. And then the Torah tells us he drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. What is it about?
It's a very sad ending to the story. We usually remember the happy ending, the rainbow, the dove. Some people remember that you're allowed to start eating meat. Everyone has their happy ending of the flood, but the truth is that the story has a very sad ending. With Noach becoming, I would say, kind of PTSD. Something is too much for him to bear in that moment. And that you quoted these two verses, and the Midrash quotes them as well. It says, of our portion, Noah is described as Ish Tzadik Tamim, a righteous, wholehearted man. And now suddenly, after the flood, Noah is suddenly described as Ish Ha'adama, a man of the soil. And you can see that juxtaposition of the two.
Well, there is some reluctance on the part of the Torah, even when it describes Noah as a righteous man, because they say in his generations. Right. He is not just righteous among all other generations. Within his own generation, he's righteous.
Yeah, I always wonder if everyone was sort of preparing us not to get too excited about Noach because they know how he's going to end up. And also that Noach is really, we'll get to this maybe later, Noach is really just the opening act for someone much more exciting who's going to come along at the end of our parasha, Abraham.
Right.
So it's almost like, I remember in school also, the teachers would always say, Noach was not such a big tzaddik. He was just a tzaddik in his generations. But Abraham, he was a tzaddik for all generations. So
yeah, back to the ending.
Right, exactly. And it's a little troubling in the sense that you can just say, Noach is considered he's the epitome of the non-Jew. The non-Jew who has a relationship with God. Abraham is the first Jew to have a relationship with God. And in that way, I sometimes wonder if there's a desire to sort of make Noah smaller than he is. I want to go the opposite. I want to say, let's not assume that Noah is mediocre at the beginning. Let's assume what the text says, that he is Ish Tzadik Tamim, he's righteous, he's perfect. What happens to him that he loses it? What happens to him that he becomes a man of the soil in that way? And almost, whose fault is it? I start by wondering, is it Noah? What's bothering him? Is perhaps what's bothering him is his own imperfection, the fact that he didn't cry out against God not to do it?
That he couldn't save everybody else?
Yeah. I mean, imagine I try to imagine what does it even mean to live a day after the flood? Right? You wake up and the world looks so different, and you're alone. It's only you and those three boys, and a few animals here and there, but the emptiness, the void, and of course survivor's guilt, right? We know that well, the sense that if you survive, you feel extremely, extremely guilty, and you don't feel it before. When God tells you you're going to be chosen and I'm going to save you, you don't feel so guilty because you're mostly happy you're going to be saved. But survivor's guilt kicks in afterwards.
But the Torah never criticizes Noah for not doing what Abraham later did and Moses did, arguing with God, trying
Right.
to convince him not to do what he intends to do. No, never really tried to save his generation, and the Torah doesn't tell us this was not this was a problematic thing for him not to do.
Right. Although you could say exactly as we were saying before, the way Noach ends up shows us that he was never really cut out to be something that exciting. In other words, you know, he doesn't for civilization when he has a chance before the flood, and after the flood, he doesn't help recreate civilization. More than anything else, Noach is just sort of, he's the genome code that, you know, we need to protect a few genes. So let's keep him going so that his sons can really continue human civilization.
So tell us more about the details. What truly happens to Noach at the end?
So it's very interesting. So the verse says Noach began to be a man of the soil. He planted a vineyard, and then he drank from the wine, became drunk, and he sits in his tent naked. And there's a second part to that story. I don't know if we want to get there, but even just this moment, it could be very exciting. It could be an amazing moment. Here's Noach. He's replanting the land. He's starting human civilization. There's something. Wine we know can be holy. It can be the wine of Kiddush. It can be the wine of human civilization. There's also a hint of Gan Eden here.
Right.
We think because of Christian art, we think that Gan Eden was the apple. But the Talmud has a whole range of things. We don't know what the fruit of Gan Eden is, and some of the rabbis say it was wine.
Right.
So a naked man sitting under a vineyard, you could think it's Adam and Eve again. But not this man. He's sitting, he's naked, he's pathetic. And that, I think that just the...
Well, like Adam and Eve, or somewhat like them, he's very lonely. He's a man to himself in this world.
Right. And that perhaps is more than anything else, maybe what's so hard for him. In other words, maybe it's what's getting off, right? Which is our question. Why is he reacting so terribly after the flood? One option is he has guilt for not saving. I think the other option is that he's noticed the destructive power of the world, and he doesn't want to continue the project. It reminds me my wife's grandparents, both Hungarian Jews who survived the Holocaust. They lost their families. They got married in the PT camp, but they decided we're going to get married, but we're not going to have any children. It took them they got married in 1946. Only in 1956, after living in Canada and living in America and having jobs and seeing sort of normal life return, did they agree to have children. And that's a tough, it's tough to be that child, by the way, I'd say, but also it's a tough prospect to want to start rebuilding life. And we sometimes take for granted how quickly Holocaust survivors or survivors of other tragedies and wars, their ability to return to life is not so simple. And I think Noach is very much going through that same tension. He starts with good intentions, he builds a vineyard, but then he succumbs to the lure of the wine and gives up on life.
Nevertheless, he gets to live a fairly long life.
That's true, which I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse sometimes, but I want to end where we started with the fact that in a way Noach is really the precursor to Abraham, and I think that there's a midrash that juxtaposes the two of them, not in saying one is the tzaddik and one is tzaddik, but says something a little different about the two. It says that Noach walked behind God. Et ha'Elohim hitalech Noach, what we read in the first verse.
Right.
God leads the way, and Noach follows. So God says, I'm going to save you, Noach follows. God says, I'm going to make a flood, Noach follows. God says, we're going to have a covenant and a rainbow, Noach follows. Noach is a follower.
A follower, not a peer.
He's a follower, he's not a peer to God, right. And he's definitely not a leader,
right,
in that sense. Now, you would think, well, that's the ideal religious person. The ideal religious person is the follower, the person who follows God. God leads the way, the Torah leads the way, the rabbi leads the way, and we follow. But Abraham is described as something different. Abraham is described as someone who walks in front of God. Halech lefanai ve'ayet tamim. Walk in front of me and be whole, like Noach. You have to be whole, be tamim, be perfect, but don't be perfect by following me. Be perfect by leading the way. And that's much scarier. And yet Abraham is the type who can do that. He leads the way. And I wonder a lot about that tension between Abraham and Noach, between being the follower, and believe me, sometimes I'm very happy to be the follower, especially when big things are happening in the world. I don't have an opinion, and I hope that world leaders, as we see today, I hope that somewhere there are world leaders who are making good decisions and leading in a good way. But on the other hand, I think also of the need to be like Abraham and lead and carve out a path. And also I wonder what it means to be God who says, you humans, or you Jewish people, or you Abraham, you lead the way, I'm going to follow. And that opens us up to a very different place for the next parasha.
Well, that's something to talk about and think about during Shabbat. Thank you, Rabbi, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Shmuel. Shabbat Shalom.